Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good morning, Instagram fam, friends and followers of as-Saafiy, and welcome to another episode of Revert Reflections. Good morning, fam. Sorry that our classes and programming in the morning has been kind of intermittent. My schedule's been kind of crazy. But I wanted to jump on this morning and kind of close the loop on the topic that we started a couple of days ago. And we were talking about certain behavior that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creatures exhibit, which is purely instinctive and not learned. And it's an indication that someone guided them, and that someone is Allah. And that the fact that Allah guided them is an indication that He exists. And so one of the great signs of Allah's existence is this purely instinctive behavior of His creatures. And I wanted to jump on this morning and give an example of that. An example of this behavior, which is purely instinctive, it is not learned, and it has to be the result of guidance from the Creator and caretaker of this universe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala jalla jalaluhu wa aduma sultanu. So the example I'm going to give, and I want you to bear with me, I think it's a very beautiful example. I'm very intrigued by it. I don't want to turn this into a science class, but I just want you to bear with me and reflect with me upon the monarch butterfly. So this monarch butterfly, it has this migration that it makes annually. And it's actually takes place right around this time, maybe a little bit earlier. It started a little bit earlier than this time. But basically, this butterfly, it has 4 annual generations. And the first generation, which emerges right around like late March, April, May, that time frame, it's actually the offspring of the 4th generation. And we're going to come back to that 4th generation, which is the most important generation and the one that we're going to focus on. At any rate, that first generation comes out. It lives like in the time of April into May. And then there's a second generation and a third generation which follows it. And those 2 generations take the bloodline of the monarch butterfly into summer. And then right around mid-August, that 4th generation will emerge. And the difference between that 4th generation and those first 3 generations is the first 3 generations live somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks. 2 to 6 weeks, brothers and sisters. But that 4th generation will actually live 6 to 9 months. And that 4th generation, what it does to continue the bloodline of the butterfly and make sure that it continues to what? Regenerate annual generations, 4 of them, year after year, is that butterfly will emerge in mid-August, and then it will begin this amazing migration southward. So basically, the butterfly, you find it all over the U.S., particularly in the eastern part of the U.S. and in southern parts of Canada. So these butterflies immediately when they emerge in mid-August, they start what? They instinctively begin to migrate southward, knowing that they're not going to be able to survive the harsh winters of Northern America. How do they know that? How do they know that? They haven't met the generations that precede them. They haven't met their parents. No one has taught them that, hey, you got to migrate or you're going to freeze to death. But instinctively, they emerge from that pupa. They emerge as butterflies and immediately start to migrate southward. They know instinctively they won't survive the harsh winters of North America. And so they start migrating southward all together, gathering together. And along the way, they have these different stopovers. There's stopovers that they make in certain cities and towns in the U.S. And there's also certain stopover sites that they stop in Mexico before they reach their ultimate destination in Mexico. So, for example, there's a city in Mexico, and outside that city, people who have researched and studied the butterflies, they say that there's a city in Mexico, and in that city, there's a school. And outside that school, there's a very beautiful tree. And that area, that city, that town is one of the stopover sites annually for this butterfly. Every year, the butterflies will stop outside that school and they will rest at that tree overnight, to the point that the kids from that school, they know that they're going to be there. And they anticipate their arrival, even though, brothers and sisters, these butterflies have never been there before. Because as we said, They live for 6 to 9 months. They make this migration. They return. They lay eggs, and then they expire. And they give birth to what? The first generation, second generation, third generation, and then this happens again. So the generation that makes the migration has never migrated before. They've never been to these places before, but every year they go to the same place. Who guided them, brothers and sisters? Who inspired them to migrate in the first place? Who inspired them to know that if they don't migrate, they will not survive the harsh winters of Northern America? Who guided them and made it possible for them to navigate, to find their way to the same overnight sites or stopover sites every year? Every year, in places in California, places in other states in North America, and the same places in Mexico, they stop for rest. Who inspired them? Who inspired them to be able to navigate and to know where to go, such that they stop not just in the same city, but at the very same tree, even though they've never been there before? We have to think about this, brothers and sisters. Who could have guided them? The only reasonable explanation is that someone had to guide them, and that someone is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the only reasonable explanation. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means in the verse that we quoted last time, where He said, الَّذِي قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى. The one who decreed the lifespans, the functions and purposes of His creatures, and guided them to fulfill their purposes and perform their functions. He's the one who programmed them. And it's a little scientific. It's a little, you might even say, I don't know, is this really an Islamic discussion? It is. Because the more we contemplate Allah's creation and how He is at work behind the scenes in His creation, the more we become certain that He exists. We become certain of His wisdom, His all-encompassing wisdom, and His right to be worshipped alone. I hope, brothers and sisters, you're as your mind is as blown as mine is, and that you are as encouraged as I am to be more committed to worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after hearing this example of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or this sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, that He is there, He exists, He's controlling everything, and we ought to worship Him, and we certainly have to believe in Him. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.